Thank you. Good morning, everyone. What a terrific opportunity this is. I've said to a few folks, this is the kind of thing I stay awake at night and dream about, these kinds of interactions. We don't have enough of them. We have this problem with controversy. Christ didn't, so we shouldn't either. Well, we'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you for Nick, the tech guy. Love you tech guys. Thank you so much. All right, we'll go ahead and get started here. And here's my presentation. I plan to present 6 reasons from the Bible, each reason lasting about 3 minutes, and then followed by 4 ways that I believe postmillennialism, the belief that Christ defeats his enemies in history. That's how I'm going to define it. The belief that Christ defeats his enemies in history. I believe all the views believe that hold that Christ defeats his enemies at some point. Postmillennialism says Christ defeats his enemies in history, and how this affects my attitudes and actions, which is basically my short definition of a worldview: attitudes, actions. One more thing about that as well. I said I've divided it here. I haven't done a real good job of dividing the Bible from the practical. I'll do the best I can, but sometimes as I explain my ideas from the scriptures, there will be times when I'll make some inadvertent, perhaps practical applications. This should leave me about 1 or 2 minutes for review. Reason number 1, my 6 biblical reasons. The last enemy, death. Then comes the end when he delivers a kingdom to God the Father, when he puts an end to all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign till he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. For he has put all things under his feet, but when he says all things are put under him, it is evident that he who did this put all things under him is accepted. Now, here's my key phrase: for he must reign till he has put all enemies under his feet. If he is in fact reigning at his Father's right hand, I don't think anybody is going to disagree with that. It seems to me that he's going to be there until he's put all his enemies under his feet. He's destroyed them. He's not going anywhere until his enemies are gone. All his enemies. That's the key right there. Reason number 2, and I'm sorry, this is going to be like a shotgun approach here, but it's the only way I can do this. After all, I'm the post-mill guy, and nobody knows about postmillennialism. No, who's ever even heard of it? It's funny. I was talking to Pastor Steve as we did this, as we were setting this up, and Pastor Steve said, "Hey, we're not going to try to make this into a huge debate and become acrimonious." And I said, "Don't worry about it, Pastor Steve. I'm a postmillennialist. I'm used to getting laughed at." So anyway, number 2, the Lord's Prayer and the Great Commission. So he said to them, "When you pray, say, 'Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.'" Now, this is a prayer. Christ praying for his will to be done. Say, pray this. Pray that my will be the same on earth as is in heaven. That's quite a prayer. Now, is it possible that prayer can be met, can be answered in any kind of positive way? I think we get the answer in the Great Commission. "And Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, 'All authority has been given to me in heaven and earth. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, teaching them to observe all things I've commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age.'" Now, here is the thing about that. I believe the Lord's Prayer is connected to the Great Commission. If we look at what this says right here, and I didn't have space to put this on my title here, but just before that, it says that some doubted, which is very intriguing. He just rose from there. What do you mean you're doubting? And Christ's answer to their doubting appears to be this: all authority is given to me in heaven and earth. All of it. Jesus Christ has no less authority on earth than he does in heaven. You ever think about that? He has all the authority. Now, he says, go therefore. So, since I have all authority, therefore go out there and preach to the nations. And the way I read this, easily enough, go therefore, since I have all authority, go therefore make disciples of all the nations, teaching them to observe all things I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always. I am with you in this project. It seems to me that what's being said here, Christ is giving them commission, go out and convert the nation, or, well, okay, if you want to not even say convert the nations, preach to the nations, but it appears as if it's going to get done because he has the authority to make sure it gets done. This is, I think, a powerful statement here that the prayer on earth as it is in heaven will be answered. We will see Christ's will done on earth as it is in heaven. I know that sounds crazy, but I don't think it's crazy according to the actual prayer and the actual Great Commission. Reason number 3, the promise of Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now that bruise there, the word bruise is not used that often in the Old Testament. So it's not the easiest word to translate, shall we say. But a bruised heel, I'll take a bruised heel over a bruised head. And some of the folks will translate this crushed head. If Satan had his head crushed, when did that happen? It had to have happened at the cross. And I would answer that 1 John says this, for this purpose the Son of God was manifested that he might destroy the works of the devil. In other words, it seems like what John is saying is, we've already had a manifestation of Christ. That manifestation is good enough to destroy the works of the devil. Let's move on. Reason number 4. Psalm 110. Now, I'm going to address right now Psalm 110 and Psalm 2. I have a reason for doing that. One pastor has called Psalm 110 and Psalm 1:2 God's favorite Bible verses. Some of you might know why that is. Psalm 2 and Psalm 110. Well, Psalm 110, I'll start with that. Psalm 110 is the most referenced and quoted verse in the New Testament. Psalm 2 is right behind it. So these are two Psalms that we might want to pay some attention to, I'm sure. And I know you all would agree with me. Ruling amidst enemies. Psalm of David, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. This sounds a little bit like 1 Corinthians 15. In other words, you're at my right hand until your enemies are finished. Done. Till I make your enemies your footstool. The Lord shall send the rod of your strength out of Zion. Rule in the midst of your enemies. Your people shall be volunteers in the day of your power and the beauty of holiness. From the womb of the morning, you have the dew of your youth. This is a very broad statement of the power of this great king. But again, till I make your enemies your footstool and rule in the midst of your enemies. We have this great king reigning in the middle of the enemies. Now let's see how this works out for the enemies. Let's see. Going on with the verse itself. The Lord has sworn and will not relent. You are a priest forever. The Lord is at your right hand. He shall execute kings in the day of his wrath. Again, this is sweeping. He shall judge among the nations. He shall fill the places with dead bodies. He shall execute the heads of many countries. He shall drink of the brook by the wayside. Therefore, he shall lift up the head. What's the idea of drinking of the brook by the wayside? It's a picture of the enemies of Christ in retreat, and his volunteers in the day of his power are pursuing their enemies, stopping by the brook just to get a drink and continue to pursue the enemies of God. Now, again, this is the most referenced psalm, actually passage in all the New Testament. So it's a good idea that we get a real clear idea of what's happening here. And it seems to me we have a sweeping picture of the tremendous, broad victory of Christ, pursuing his enemies, among his enemies. And if he has these enemies on the cross or on the earth, it certainly looks like we're talking about in time and in history. Reason number 5. We're going to go to Psalm 2 and Acts 4. Now, this is pretty important right here, because one of the reasons why I became postmillennial is I began to study what the New Testament had to say about the Old Testament. How does the New Testament interpret the Old Testament? And there's an awful lot of interpretations within the scriptures itself. I'll give you a quick example now. This is not new to old, but we often have in these discussions of prophecy and eschatology, we have questions, we have comments about how to interpret. It's the literal thing. You know, what is literal? I would say meanings are literal. I would say words are not literal. It's meanings. I'll give you an example. The first time we see a vision with the sun and moon and stars, you remember what it was, right? It was Jacob, right? And so Jacob and Joseph, of course, Joseph has the dream and he says, I dreamt the sun and the moon and the stars bowed down to me. And Jacob, his father, who's trying to interpret this, he doesn't go out and say, those things are round. I wonder what they look like when they're bowing. He doesn't do that. He immediately understands the literal meaning of the dream. Do you mean your mother and your father and your brothers are going to bow down to you? He interpreted it literally. And that's a principle that obviously you have to bring into your hermeneutic. But Psalm 2 and Acts 4, little bit of time here. I'm not going to quote Psalm 2 because Acts 4 actually does it for us. I want you to see what's happening here. They raise their voice to God. Now, this is in Acts 4, and these folks are being persecuted by the civil authorities, if you will. Now, remember, in most schemes, in premillennial schemes, of course, that I'm familiar with, Psalm 2 is definitely a future event. Rule with a rod of iron, for example, that has to be future. Christ isn't ruling now, and so forth. Not with a rod of iron, anyway. I would encourage you at this point, if you miss everything else I say, I would encourage you to study Psalm 2 and the corresponding passage in Acts chapter 4. Listen to what these folks say. They raised their voice to God. They're praying and said, Lord, you are God who made heaven and earth, who by the mouth of your servant David have said, why did the nations rage and the people plot vain things? The kings of the earth took their stand, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. Again, in most prophecy schemes, I hate the word use scheme. That's not a good word, but ideas that I'm familiar with, this is future. Psalm 2 is completely future. You know, why do the nations rage? The people plot a vain thing. Yet I've set my king on Zion and so forth. But I want you to see what those believers in Acts 4 believed about it. In other words, I am willing to take the interpretation of the Bible itself over any kind of, prophecy charts or whatever. Okay, so this is how they apply this. They say the kings of the earth took their stand, the rulers were gathered together. They quote that, and then they say this. For truly against your holy servant Jesus, they're applying the anointed right there, right? For truly against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate with the Gentiles and the people of Israel were gathered together to do whatever your hand determined before to be done. It sounds like that these people in Acts 4 are applying Psalm 2, which in so many ideas is all future. Not future for them. Present. King on Zion. Kings of the earth gathering against him and calling on the great king to deal with them. How do we deal with them? To do whatever your hand, but let's go back. For truly against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and people of Israel were gathered together to do whatever your hand determined before to be done. Now, Lord, they're calling on this king. So support them here. Now, Lord, look on their threats and grant to your servants that with all boldness they may speak your word. I see it as impossible to put Psalm 2 in the future based on the believers and the interpretation of the New Testament of the Old. Reason number 6, the kingdom expanding gradually. Then the iron, the clay, this is from Daniel, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away, and so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So it starts small, this kingdom does, and it grows over time. Now, another verse. This is from Matthew chapter 12, quoting Isaiah. Isaiah, of course, who had a lot of things to say about the kingdom. It says, "But when Jesus knew it, he withdrew from there, and great multitudes followed him, and he healed them all. Yet he warned them not to make him known, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by Isaiah the prophet, saying," listen to Isaiah's prophecy here about the kingdom. "Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved, I will put my spirit upon him, and he will..." Again, this is broad stuff here. This encompasses the entire earth. "I will put my spirit upon him, and he will declare justice to the Gentiles." What a wonderful king. "He will not quarrel nor cry out, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and smoking flax he will not quench, till he sends forth justice to victory." I don't care what kind of millennial view you have. Is that not a most beautiful statement? Sending forth justice to victory. Oh, how we cry out for that. This king's going to get it done. And we have great hope. This is going to happen in history. This king is going to get it done. Yes. Till he sends forth justice to victory, and in his name Gentiles will trust. This is not limited, this kingdom. It's everyone. So those are my 6 biblical reasons, if you will. Now, what difference does it make? Number 1, this king rules the civil magistrate as a civil magistrate. I want to talk to you about this. In my ministry in Lancaster County, generally speaking, on Wednesdays, I get a chance to speak to the county commissioners. Can I speak to them from the standpoint that they answer to a king? Or are they an end in themselves? I want to tell you folks something. I've had this conversation occasionally with pastors, and I have seen that pastors, in my experience, while they have broad statements about the kingship of Christ is ruling over everything and so forth, but when I challenge them to say, you know what, Caesar has to bow to Christ just like everybody else. He does not get a pass. When I say that, the pastors get nervous, I'm telling you. They get nervous. I know they have the broad statements, but they get nervous. You know why? Because they don't want to tell Caesar, they don't want to tell the civil magistrate that they have to answer to Christ. They don't want to do it. Well, I would remind you, John the Baptist got it done. And interestingly enough, John the Baptist, he was a man who believed in the kingship of Christ. He went to Herod and said, "It's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." Any response by Herod? "Hey, you know what? Your Jesus isn't king here. I'm in charge." That would have been an odd response for John the Baptist. In fact, I actually one time did a skit, John the Baptist as a 2 kingdom guy, and I was Herod, and a friend of mine was John the Baptist. And I, in the skit, I, as the Herod, started telling John to get lost. I'm king here. Your king is king of the spiritual stuff. I'm king of, I have my feet on the ground. I'm ruling where it actually counts. And I have found this is very discouraging. I have found that when it comes to ruling, when it comes to the civil magistrate, I have found that the broad majority of Christianity, institutional Christianity, actually agrees with the pagans. The pagans say, you guys are doing the spiritual thing, let us do the physical stuff. And the Christians agree with them. How is Christ introduced in the book of Revelation? John to the 7 churches which are in Asia. Grace to you and peace from him who is, and who was, and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before the throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, the ruler over the kings of the earth now. Makes sense. He has all authority, right? That's that. I could spend some more time on that. Secondly, this is going to be a little controversial. I think postmillennialism delivers from a kind of a form of modern deism. Postmillennialism recognizes the present war between Christ and all his enemies. Is it a war? Is it détente? Is it You Canaanites get your area, and us Christians will take this area? Or is it a battle for every single thing? Now, let me explain myself. I don't believe that people who don't believe in postmillennialism are deists at all in the classic sense. I don't believe that. But let's talk about the cosmological sense. Is your belief that the world is just kind of winding down and we're just kind of sort of waiting until things get bad enough to be over with? I would call that a form of deism. I would. You know, Jesus, he's still saving people, and that's where my contemporary brothers and sisters would totally disagree with the deists of the past. They obviously believe that Christ is working in the world. But is he working cosmologically? Is he just working with individuals? Or is he working with nations? Now, this is where we get in trouble again. Let's do this for a second. Since I'm already in lots of hot water, I'm a postmillennialist after all. I live in hot water. Here's the thing. I will ask Christians, is Christ Lord of you personally? Oh, yeah. No doubt. Is Christ Lord of your family? Oh, yeah. Dumb question. Is Christ Lord of your church? Yeah. Is Christ Lord of the nations? Is Christ Lord of the state? And then things get a little fuzzy, I gotta tell you. Why? Why is that? Come on. Christ is Lord of the nations. And every single civil magistrate will answer to that Christ. Every single one. And he is working in the world to destroy his enemies. He'll be at his Father's right hand until his enemies are gone. Thirdly, then, I want to talk about this. The prevailing against the gates of hell, optimism, and historical progress. Let's talk about this for a second. Let's see, we have a struggle between the gates of hell and the Church of Jesus Christ. And Christ said, of course, that the gates of hell will prevail against the church because, don't you know, things are going to get worse and worse. No, he actually said the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. I think we have an illustration of the gates of hell, or the gates anyway, not prevailing. When the Gazites were told, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were quiet all night, saying, in the morning when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low until midnight, then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the two gateposts, pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders, and carried them on the top of the hill that faces Hebron. I hope I'm not overworking the scripture too much to say that that is an example of the gates of the city not prevailing against Samson. Christ says that's what's going to happen with the church against the gates of hell. This last one here, thank you so much for your patience here. I want to talk a little bit about technology. I probably shouldn't talk about technology because I am a technophobe. I'm scared of it. But going back here, let me go back here just a little bit. Let me go back to this one. Prevailing against the gates of hell, optimism and historical progress. Here's my challenge to non-postmillennialists. If the world is truly getting worse and worse, now this is a practical challenge, but I think it does have to do with the idea of the gates of hell. It's not just a practical challenge. If the world is truly getting worse and worse, then going backwards, it must have been getting better and better. Fair enough? Fair enough? I mean, if tomorrow and next year is worse, then going backwards, it must have been better. People struggle over this, but it's really simple stuff. It's super simple. Then I ask, if things were better going backwards, when was the high point of history? That question has to be answered at some point by everyone who believes the world just has to get worse and worse. At some point, you've got to be able to say to me, well, the high point was, and I think I'm going to have a really hard time doing that. I want to talk about technology briefly because I got ahead of myself. If the world is getting worse and worse, then technology is the enemy. You ever think about that? Because the more tech you have, the more bad people are going to be able to use it to even do more bad things. Technology is a bad thing in a system where things have to get worse and worse. Now, I can't talk too much more about technology because that's about all I know. I mean, technology is a wonderful thing. I'll take a poor Robinson Crusoe didn't have as I recall anyway, didn't have a metal axe. He had to make himself kind of he didn't have a metal shovel, I should say. He had to make himself one out of wood. But he got technology to make himself a metal shovel. Technology goes way back. It's not just computers and so forth. It's things like axe heads and the wheel. Bad things if you believe the world has to get worse and worse. Think about it. Okay, so to review. Reason number 1, the last enemy being death, the Lord's Prayer and the Great Commission, the promise of Genesis 3:15, Psalm 110, ruling amidst enemies, Psalm 2 and Acts 4. I'd really encourage you to check those two out. The kingdom expanding gradually there, number 6. Okay, and my 4 practical reasons. The king rules a civil magistrate as a civil magistrate. I want to spend a moment on this. I believe that in postmillennialism, the idea of Christ as king is the most clear, especially when it comes to the civil magistrate. I think in premillennialism and amillennialism, I think they have the doctrinal statements of the kingship of Christ. But you go from this, gathering today, and I challenge you to do this. Ask your pastor, ask people been Christians for a long time, and ask them this. Does the civil magistrate have to bow to Christ the King? And I will be shocked if you don't get a sort of a deer in the headlights look. Because they haven't thought about it that much. As a postmillennialist, it's just obvious. Christ is king. He's been enthroned in Zion. He is ruling with a rod of iron, and he will destroy his enemies. And you, Mr. Civil Magistrate, you can either be a rebel or you can be a willing servant, but what you think about Christ as king doesn't change the fact that he's king. Secondly, I said it delivers from a form of modern deism. That might be the most difficult one for me to say and for me perhaps to believe or to defend. Thirdly, then, prevailing against the gates of hell. I have confidence based on the word of Christ that his church at the end is going to be standing. The gates of hell are not. And finally, then, I talked about technology. All right. I have a brief presentation to do, and thank you to Nick for being such a helpful. See now, Nick, what did I do? This is not Nick's fault. This is a brief presentation on the growth of Christianity over the years now. This is not completely accurate in the sense that you have Roman Catholicism, which is called Christianity, which is a problem. But, certainly during the time you had people prior to the Reformation who were true believers, even though we were part of the Roman Catholic Church, as I was called the Roman Catholic Church, because I am a Catholic. Ain't no Roman Catholic. All right, here we go. Okay. It's a little hard to see North America being white right now as being dominated by Christianity. But the point is that Christianity is a lot further along than it was 2,000 years ago, and it's a lot less far along than it's going to be 2,000 years from now. Christ is king. His enemies had better respect him and bow before him, because he will destroy them. We have a wonderful king, my friends, and I hope it motivates you to do what Paul said at the end of 1 Corinthians 15. I referenced 1 Corinthians 15 earlier. Remember what he says at the end? Wherefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. And I would argue that the postmillennial view fits that verse the best. Your labor is not in vain in the Lord. I want to thank you all for your very kind attention.